Right, so imagine being the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, dealing with your usual Friday morning chaos, maybe planning what Netflix documentary you're going to emotionally process next with your family, when suddenly the White House rings you up and essentially says, "Hey mate, we're going to publicly humiliate you on the international stage by exposing how catastrophically you failed on immigration." That's not just a bad day at the office, is it? That's a geopolitical slap in the face delivered with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. And that's exactly what's happened to Keir Starmer this week, because the Trump administration has decided that Britain's migrant crime crisis is so appalling, so spectacular in its failure, that American diplomats need to actively collect data on just how badly we've messed this up. Welcome to UK Political Insight, where today we're diving into what might be the most humiliating diplomatic moment for a British Prime Minister in recent memory. Let's just pause for a second and really appreciate the absurdity of this situation. The United States of America, a country that's had its own rather colorful history with immigration debates, has looked at Britain and essentially said, "You know what? You lot are so bad at this that we're making it official government policy to document your failures." That's not normal diplomatic relations, is it? That's not the special relationship we always bang on about. That's more like a disappointed parent keeping a detailed record of their teenager's mistakes to use as evidence later. And the thing is, they're not even being subtle about it. This wasn't a quiet backroom conversation. This was a full-blown cable sent to American embassies across Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, essentially broadcasting to the world that Britain has become the poster child for immigration policy disasters. The cable itself is absolutely savage in its language. The White House has ordered American diplomats to review what they're calling human rights abuses committed by migrants in host countries. Now that's diplomatic speak for something far more blunt, isn't it? They're basically saying, go and find out exactly how badly these countries have screwed up and make sure everyone knows about it. But here's where it gets really interesting, because out of all the countries they could have focused on, out of all the possible examples they could have highlighted, Britain was specifically singled out. Not as one example among many, as the egregious example, as the country that so spectacularly failed to curb migration that they needed special mention for their tolerance of what the memo called organized rape gangs. That's not just diplomatic criticism, that's diplomatic evisceration. Now, before we go any further, let's talk about what this actually means, because this isn't just Trump being Trump, firing off controversial statements for attention. This is official U.S. State Department policy, documented in cables to embassies around the world. A senior State Department official didn't mince words when they said that British people had voted for reform of mass migration, but had been repeatedly let down by their politicians. And you know what's particularly cutting about that statement? It's true. Whether you agree with concerns about immigration or not, it's undeniable that successive governments, both conservative and Labour, have promised to address immigration concerns and then comprehensively failed to deliver meaningful change that satisfied those who voted for it. The official went even further, saying that time and time again, governments of both colors have said they're going to take action to solve the mass migration crisis, and time again, despite people continuously voting for some sort of resolution or relief, nothing has really happened. That's a direct accusation that British democracy has failed on this issue, that politicians have made promises, won elections based on those promises, and then completely abandoned them once in power. And when that criticism is coming from a foreign government, when it's being documented in official diplomatic cables, that's not just embarrassing. That's a fundamental questioning of whether British politicians can be trusted to deliver what they promise voters. But the Trump administration didn't stop at general criticism about broken promises and failed policies. Oh no, they got specific. The State Department official highlighted what they called disturbing increases in sexual assaults and violent attacks, particularly on women and young girls by people of migrant backgrounds across Europe. They specifically mentioned violent rape gangs and organized rape gangs in the United Kingdom and the targeting of young girls. They also pointed to human trafficking, anti-Semitic attacks, and anti-Christian attacks largely by people of radical Islamic backgrounds. Now, whether you think this characterization is fair or inflammatory, the fact remains that these issues have been documented in numerous inquiries, particularly the grooming gang scandals in places like Rotherham, Oxford, and other British towns. And here's where the comparison becomes really pointed. because the President Trump has deployed the U.S. military to America's southern border, and apparently this has resulted in illegal crossings from Mexico dropping to their lowest level since 1970. Now, we can debate the methods, we can debate the appropriateness, we can debate the human cost, but the Trump administration is basically saying, look, we identified a problem, we took dramatic action, and we got results. During Trump's state visit to Windsor back in September, he apparently advised Keir Starmer to follow suit and deploy the British Armed Forces to the Channel to prevent small boat crossings. Can you imagine that conversation? The optics of the American president telling the British Prime Minister how to control his own borders. That's not diplomatic advice. That's a barely veiled suggestion that you're completely out of your depth. What makes this whole situation even more complex is that senior members of the Trump administration have often expressed genuine fondness for the UK while simultaneously lamenting what they see as the effects of immigration on Britain. It's like watching someone who loves a friend but is horrified by their life choices. They're not attacking Britain out of malice, they're criticizing what they view as the destruction of something they value. Vice President J.D. Vance, who apparently spent his summer holiday in the Cotswolds, which is about as quintessentially English as you can get, has described the UK as an Islamist country and said immigration had undercut wages. Now that's an extraordinarily strong characterization that most people would dispute, but the fact that it's coming from someone who clearly appreciates British culture enough to holiday there makes it even more pointed. And here's where this story takes another turn, because it's not just American politicians criticizing from across the Atlantic. Sammy Woodhouse, a survivor of the Rotherham grooming gang, has revealed that she's seeking a meeting with Trump and Vance to discuss what she calls institutional failures and the attack on free speech surrounding the scandal. Think about that for a moment. A British victim of crimes that happened on British soil, investigated by British authorities, feels that she needs to go to the American president to get her voice heard. That's an absolutely damning indictment of how survivors feel they've been treated by British institutions. Woodhouse said in an Instagram post that she's being censored more now than ever, and that we cannot leave this to our governments. When victims are turning to foreign leaders because they don't trust their own government to address their concerns, something has gone catastrophically wrong. The institutional failures Woodhouse mentions aren't conspiracy theories or exaggerations. They're documented facts from multiple inquiries. The Rotherham scandal alone involved an estimated 1,400 children being sexually exploited over 16 years. Authorities knew about it. Reports were made, and nothing meaningful happened for years because of what inquiries described as a combination of incompetence, neglect, and fear of being labeled racist. Similar patterns emerged in Oxford, Rochdale, Telford, and other towns. These aren't isolated incidents. They represent systemic failures to protect vulnerable children. And the fact that authorities repeatedly prioritized other concerns over child protection is something that understandably generates enormous anger. So where does this leave Keir Starmer? Well, in an absolutely impossible position, really. On one hand, he's got the Trump administration publicly documenting what they view as Britain's immigration failures and broadcasting it to the world. On the other hand, he's got victims of grooming gangs saying they're being censored and can't trust the British government to address their concerns. And in the middle of all this, he's got to somehow navigate immigration policy in a way that satisfies voters who've been promised reform for years, while also maintaining Britain's international reputation and relationship with its most important ally. The pressure from the White House isn't going away either. The Trump administration has made it clear they're watching Britain's response to this closely. They're collecting data, they're monitoring progress or lack thereof, and they're not shy about making their views public. This isn't quiet diplomatic pressure, this is loud, public, documented criticism that's impossible to ignore. And the longer Starmer takes to respond meaningfully, the worse this looks, both domestically